Hello, and welcome to Rare on Air, the Eurordis Rare Diseases Europe podcast series. I'm Julien Poulain, and in this series, I speak to people across the rare disease community who share with me their stories, their challenges, and their successes. In today's episode, I speak to Tomasz Grybek, a Polish economist, father, and rare disease advocate whose teenage son Borys lives with metachromatic leukodystrophy, a rare and progressive neurological disease. Tomek tells me the story of his family's diagnosis journey, from a chance online discovery to over 20,000 kilometers of travel in search of a treatment. He shares how these experiences led him to become a passionate advocate for patient involvement in the regulatory decision-making of medicines, including through his role as a patient representative on the Paediatric Committee of the European Medicines Agency. I discuss with Tomek why it's essential that patient voices are not only heard, but empowered, including through voting rights on EMA committees, and how their lived experience brings unique and irreplaceable value to some of Europe's most consequential scientific discussions. Beforehand, though, I should share that the views expressed by Tomek in this podcast are his personal views. Therefore, Tomek's comments should not be understood or quoted as being made on behalf of or reflecting the position of the European Medicines Agency or its Paediatric Committee. Tomek, thank you very much for joining me today.
Hi, Julian. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, Tomek, may I ask you, when did you first learn that Borys likely had a condition that required some medical attention? What were the first symptoms that you and your family became aware of?
Yes. So thank you for the question. So Borys was around 5. We saw him tiptoeing, walking with the not so common pattern of walking for 5-year-olds. So we decided to investigate a bit further with healthcare professionals, medical doctors. And our story is not the kind of story which is a very example of a long diagnostic odyssey, because we quite quickly got the diagnosis of rare neurodegenerative disease that Borys has, and that makes us a rare family and rare parents with great boy on board. But this diagnosis that arrived quite early and fast opened the door for, I would say, treatment odyssey, because it took us almost 1 year to reach the treatment center in Poland. But before that, we traveled across globe, visiting 2 continents, 3 treatment centers, 2 in Europe, 1 in North America, United States. And we calculated that all together we traveled more than 20,000 kilometers for finding the treatment. And ultimately, it turned out that there is a treatment center that in Poland, 5 hours drive from our home, where Borys could be treated with the same standard of care treatment that we could get in United States.
Oh, wow.
So that was a discovery, and Borys was first child in this condition treated in stem cell transplant, bone marrow transplant in Poland. But before that, we tried to be enrolled in 2 clinical trials. But regrettably, at that time, the progression of the disease and the benefit ratio were not in favor of Borys. So we were not able to be enrolled in these clinical trials.
I see. That is a shame. But for the benefit of the listener, could you explain what exactly is the condition that he has? Do you know what causes it, and what tend to be the main symptoms?
Okay, so Borys has a condition called metachromatic leukodystrophy. The acronym is MLD, lysosomal storage disorder. It's a monogenic caused by the faulty gene called ARSA gene, where the production of an enzyme called aryl sulfatase A is impacted, and there is a deficiency of the enzyme. And due to the residual values of the enzyme, the type of the fatty called sulfatide is stored in CNS, so central nervous system, and peripheral nerve system. So basically, as always, there's a complication based on the time of onset. We have 4 subtypes of the disease. So there is late infantile, early juvenile, late juvenile, and adult form. And the youngest, late infantile form, has the fastest progression and leads to the death of the children having this form. So basically, the symptoms are cognitive and motor.
I see.
When you have the onset of the symptoms of the disease, it can take up to 5 years when the child passes away due to the disease progression in this the fastest progressing the form. In milder form, how the disease progress is basically the same, but it takes more time, like up to 10 years. But the outcome is basically the same with very severely impacted quality of life. And in terms of the treatment, basically there are three main strategies. You can try the enzyme replacement therapy, the substrate reduction therapy, or the bone marrow transplant. And there is a treatment called gene therapy, but it's a autologous stem cell transplant with ex vivo modified gene with lentiviral. So this was a huge, massive breakthrough, this setting and delivering the gene therapy to the market. That time in 2015, we tried to be enrolled in this clinical trial for gene therapy. So that's the results at that stage. And now the label for the treatment of gene therapy is for the pre-symptomatic or early symptomatic children. The newborn screening and early diagnosis is paramount of the importance in terms of the best outcome of the treatment with gene therapy. In our case, as mentioned, progression of the Borys disease was too much advanced, so we could not benefit from the gene therapy treatment. But on the other hand, we may say that we are super lucky as a community, because during the the decade since Borys bone marrow transplant, we see that something that was in the clinical trial setup is now available on the market in many countries of Europe, and being available in more and more countries in every year for benefit of the children, and combined with newborn screening. So the efforts, like in his lifetime, in our lifetime, that the landscape shifted 180 degrees from only standard of care to having a gene therapy with very positive, promising result whenever it's treated or administered presymptomatically.
I see. I know you mentioned that Borys would not have been able to receive this gene therapy, as I understand it. But in light of the progress that has been made with regard to treatments for this condition, for Borys's condition, has his healthcare evolved? Are there treatments he can receive today that previously in his life he would not have been able to? What's the status of his healthcare today like? What do you make of it?
So basically, this gene therapy or stem cell transplant or bone marrow transplant is designed to be one-time treatment. So the outcome of early presymptomatic children administered with the gene therapy is that there are more or less the same outcomes as healthy individuals. In terms of Borys, the bone marrow transplant was administered relatively late, and the progression was already observed especially in the motor, but also in verbal communication, some aspects of the cognitive functions. So we used to say the progression is arrested. So basically, if you think about the natural cause of disease, most likely without the treatment, he would not be here. But with the treatment, the disease progression is preserved. His cognitive functions are more or less in place. So we can focus on quality of life of Borys' life of whole family, and do the physiotherapy, active therapy, the non-verbal communication therapies, speech therapy, everything that helps him to live the full potential of his life. As you know, we are hopeless fans of or enthusiasts of jazz music. So we, every time we can have this opportunity, we go with Borys for a jazz concert. He likes traveling, sightseeing, listening to the podcasts and books. So we are reading a lot of books for him, and he's listening to a lot of audiobooks. So all these activities taken that time, 10 years back, made his life or good level of quality compared to that natural cause of disease that he would have if without the treatment. And the whole efforts that whole the MLD community is doing is to have this treatment available and affordable for patients.
No, that's a very, very necessary and worthy aim. How old is he today?
16.
16, cool. And who are his favorite jazz musicians, if he has any?
Yes, of course. So basically, we are enthusiasts of cool jazz. So starting for like big American jazz stars like Miles Davis, Coltrane, and others, but in also Nordic jazz. So this like Esbjörn Svensson trio, Matthias Eik, but also our Marcin Wasilewski trio. These are the ones we are really like to listen, and we listen them. Try to go on a live concert because the best music is when you are in the place with others, listening on this when the musician is playing on the stage. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's particularly the case with jazz, with that genre. So you've discussed the development in treatments, but what were the areas where you felt that maybe healthcare was particularly lacking, whether it was regard to treatment availability or just the areas in which healthcare was delivered? What did you find in Poland, perhaps, but perhaps with relevance to other European countries, were the biggest shortcomings in his care?
So, as I started to tell you, we live in north part of Poland, and the treatment was in the south part. And nobody knew about this treatment center, about this particular professor that he is treating patients with rare conditions, with bone marrow transplant like metachromatic, or at least we were not aware. So basically, how we learned about this professor and how he learned about us. It's a funny story because one of the internet portals, they published an article about the family that is, packing their bags and going to United States to look for a treatment for condition of their son. And under the article, there was one comment made by someone saying, "Oh, why you are going to United States? You should come to Wrocław. There is a treatment center at street ABC." But, we as a parent, we thought, okay, people write various things in the internet. So we basically disregard the comment. But the guy reached out to our leading professor saying, "Oh, I heard about this family. Do you know them?" And yes, of course. So we got in contact through the news about us. So we agreed that we will go to United States to have a enrollment and full evaluation in Pittsburgh Center, and then we will come back with the results, and the treatment would be in Wrocław. So this information came to us not through clinical or hospital setup. At the beginning, nobody knew that there is a treatment in Poland available, which is a kind of standard of care, which was not necessarily the label for this, like registered label for this particular Borys disease, but could work as a standard of care in pre-symptomatic or really symptomatic children. The other thing that I think falls short was this whole perspective of the biosocial aspects of the diagnosis, because it's still as a challenge to have a biopsychosocial model in place, because the healthcare professionals, healthcare providers, they more focus on biomedical model, so how to provide the treatment, the proper care, and all around this biomedical aspects and model, less about the psychosocial one.
Yeah.
So that was something that we did not receive at that time. But to be honest, we were so focused on finding the solution that we did not even recall or notice that we are missing something.
Can you retrace for me your personal steps into advocacy for the population of people impacted both by the condition that your son has, but also rare diseases in general? What motivated you to step into advocacy, and how did that journey lead to your role at the EMA?
Yes, so it can sound very romantic and heartwarming, but the truth is that when Borys was during the treatment and he was in the isolation room during the stem cell transplant, we decided with my wife and that we would like to do something for others, because during this year of this treatment odyssey, we have received a lot of support from various people, starting from our regular colleagues, neighbors, family. And we said, okay, we would like to do something. And we decided that time that we would like to focus on support to the public side, because the other stakeholders have more access to the resources, various resources, not necessarily the case of the public side. So in our terms, we decided to be as a kind of expert think tank organization supporting the public side. And that gave us this kind of possibility to develop ourselves, but also to learn from how the public system or regulatory system and other systems works through cooperation with the representatives of the system. And as I told you, in our case, the treatment was already in the clinical trial setup, and the program was running, and there was no man's land in this regard. So back in 2018, Maria from our Eurordis headhunted me to take part in one of the procedures at the European Medicine Agency at EMA to act as a patient expert. And due to all these circumstances that I have told you, we were able to take part with non-conflict of interest and knowledge that we gained through our story. I find myself also as a scientific-oriented person, so I find it very enjoyable and developing myself as well when I work based on scientific evidence with scientific documents. And when I had this possibility to taste the flavor of working in the regulatory ecosystem with clinical evaluators, scientific officers, representatives of EMA and other stakeholders, I find it very enjoyable and as a niche that I could contribute in the most meaningful and impactful way. 1 year later, there was an open call for patient representatives of patient organization at Paediatric Committee, PDCO, and I submit or apply for this position. And after some evaluation period, it turned out that I was appointed as an alternate member of the patient representatives at Paediatric Committee since September 2020. So it is now it's almost 5 years that I'm a member, since 2023 for the second time as a member of the Paediatric Committee. So from like a romantic discussion between two parents to European level advocacy, it took me maybe 5 years, but with dedicated plan and developing and finding a niche. I was at the beginning of June at European Open Academy of Eurordis at the schools, and I had the privilege to have a lecture for the students at the faculty of Open Academy. And one thing that I conveyed the message to them, that first of all, you have to find your niche that you are very good at. And then when you find this niche and you do it what you like to do, then you are the most successful and efficient in doing it. So this is what also drives me in my activity.
So when you first joined the PDCO, was there anything that took you by surprise?
Yes. So also this story has something interesting. Basically, that was the September-October of 2020. It was the middle of pandemic of C-19. So we had to adjust the work of the committee to new circumstances and working remotely. and I'm an extrovert person who likes relation with others and, really needed to be face to face. So that time it was quite hard for me or challenging because I had zero procedural knowledge about PDCO. In practice, in theory, I received the welcome pack. I read all the information and pediatric regulation, everything, but still theory and practice not necessarily are the same. But what I found really encouraging and positive, that the pediatric committee, the whole community were very open. So they were very dedicated to support me. I had a member that time who was experienced member. Dimitrios was always open to help me, to guide me. So this was this patient centricity and patient engagement in real life, I would say even more, knowing that I'm a newcomer at the committee. I got a lot of support from all the people around, from the secretariat, from the scientific office, from the stakeholders office, from the committee members. And from the very beginning, we were heard and listened as a patient and healthcare professionals. And whenever we need any support, there were people who were there to support us with our task and work.
That's interesting. So you found that actually, like, patients weren't just kind of treated as moral to haves. They actually were embraced on the committee as experts. They weren't just members that clearly other members felt like it was an obligation to have. That was your sense.
Yes, absolutely. Full stop what you have said. And furthermore, I would say I felt that there is a real appetite to hear my voice, but also to invite me to contribute in a workflow of the committee. Because pediatric committee, just to say for the benefit of our listeners, that committee is making evaluation of pediatric investigation plans. So this is a full dossier that need to be evaluated by a team of pediatric committee and EMA officers. And we, as a patient representative or a civil society, we were openly invited to volunteer for the work, which is dedicated to each and every member, including civil society representatives. So there was, as you said, there was nothing that we were like morally felt that we should be there, but we felt ourselves as equal partners in this setup. And in return, we do our best as a civil society representative to contribute meaningfully in the discussion and then in the work of the committee.
So what do you think would be lacking from the decisions that are made if patient representation wasn't enshrined in these committees?
So basically, the most important part of patient engagement is the partnership and the shared leadership on the committee. So this is something which I feel every time I join the committee or I work with the committee, I feel like an equal partner. And this is a privilege, but also an obligation for me to be prepared to contribute meaningfully, to be a reliable partner. With this responsibility comes the power of voting. So I felt myself obliged to be a real partner because I have a real privilege. And furthermore, if we want to have a real patient engagement, we should have a culture of equal participatory engagement of each civil society representative at the committee. And I find the regulatory sector as this kind of sector where the decision has a big impact and influence on the well-being on everyone in one health approach. So what we fear the most is the blind spots.
Right.
Basically, to put it in a simple words, we don't know what we don't know. So if the patient's voice would be reduced to only consultation or nice to have, then we are in these blind spots where the patients are not asked to share their views. And the other thing is that in principle, advisors are not requested to work and to contribute. And I'm aware that CHMP committee members have different role to act, to do, and the evaluation is more complex and comprehensive. But still, I feel that there is a room for real patient engagement in full spectrum, with voting rights and being a meaningful contributor to the work of the committee, which was proven by my predecessors and every and each member at various committees. So all this real world evidence give the right to say that the civil society representatives are equal partners to other stakeholders which or who are present and will be present in the future composition of the committee.
Yeah, that all makes sense, Tomek. Thank you for highlighting those points about the importance of patient representation. Also, I remember us meeting in Riga at the end of last month for the membership meeting. And I think I remember you saying something about how appreciation for quality of life aspects is something that patient representatives to these committees bring, which may not be quite so strong amongst other representatives. I found that to be quite an interesting example of where patient representatives can bring unique value. Can you expand on what you would have meant by that?
Yes, of course. So it's a very good question, because I will start with the quote. I think that Peter Rosenbaum said that doctors learn from textbooks and patient representatives learn from story written by our lives. And there is no or bad textbooks or storybooks that should be written or read. But the point is that we should combine these two perspectives. So patient representatives are bringing the real life experience to the discussion. And the clinical program, the main aim is to prove the safety, efficacy of the product. But at the same time, when the timeline of the development is sometimes more than 15 years, this is the window of opportunity to capture real-world evidence in terms of quality of life, in terms of patient-reported outcome that will be valued and used for the HTA process and for the pricing and reimbursement of the product. So basically, what I'm trying always to repeat is like the finish line for the regulatory in terms of the clinical evaluation is set at the market authorization approval. But
Right.
for us as a patients, the finish line is at the affordability and availability of the treatment on the market. Because having a treatment on the market which is not available for you is like having a lollipop behind the glass window, bringing us back to the first initial question that you asked about our story. That time, we knew there is no approved treatment on the market. But hypothetically, if that time I would knew that there is a treatment approved, available, but I cannot access from various reasons, that would be a devastating for me as a father. So saying that, we, as a patient representative, we bring not only this real life experience perspective, but we also bring this narrative to the committees that the availability and real access to the treatment is a necessity that we want to all have. And what I also see, because as I told you, I felt that the committee is very patient-centric. But what I see now, they became, which seemed to me not possible, they became even more and more patient-centric. And when we talk about the partnership, if I am equal partner, the partnerships assumes exchange of knowledge and experience. So I learned from them the perspectives of clinical evaluators, the healthcare professionals, the regulators' perspective. But at the same time, they learn from me this patient perspective, the real world experience, lived experience of a carrier, of a patient, or the whole community. And as I mentioned earlier, if we brought all this perspective to the table, we have a perfect blend. And this cannot be achieved by consulting and asking on demand. You have to build the trust.
Yeah.
And this is something I would like to also underline. All development and cooperation come with trust. And trust is built over the time with reliability, real cooperation, and also challenging and facing challenges together. And this, again, can only be achieved by being a real partner at the committee, the same as others, not a special member, not a good to have member or nice to have member.
That's really interesting. Thank you for making that point. And if I may ask one final question, as we talk today for this episode, we've actually heard that there is some agreement in the Council of the EU on the general pharmaceutical legislation. And once an agreement has been formally reached, the final stage of the pharmaceutical legislation reforms will be negotiations between the institutions of the European Commission, the Council of the EU, and the European Parliament. Eurordis and our community has heard that there is a risk that the original proposals from the European Commission, which included patient representatives with voting rights being enshrined on the Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use, the CHMP, there is a risk, we've heard, that patient voting rights will be removed. If you were in an elevator with an EU policymaker, what would be your pitch to them as to why we must make sure that in those committees there are patient representatives with voting rights?
I hope it will be a sky tower with 35 floors to reach. But I will again start with the quote. In the 16th century, there was a constitution in Poland called Nihil Novi, which basically means nothing new without us, nothing without us. And I would say that if you want to have a real engagement, impactful, and bringing the real perspective, you need to give a proper recognition through also a voting power. So you cannot have a meaningful participation without treating equally the person you are inviting to this table. So voting rights is, in my perspective, is a great privilege that comes with great responsibility. And what I would also say is that not having voting rights for patients would be a loss for the organizational culture of European Medicine Agency in terms of culture of engagement, because this was not granted, that the whole patient engagement did not come with one regulation in place saying, since today, patients are equal partners. The trust was built in the track record of efforts of every and each patient civil society representative. And then at the end, I would say, oh, what a nice view. And we have a bright perspective ahead of us. So let's make patients equals and have a voting rights.
Absolutely. I think that's a very effective elevator pitch, very important elevator ride. And hopefully people will hear your message, which of course isn't just yours, but the message that so many people are sharing from across the patient community.
Thank you for saying that. And what I can also share as a person, on a personal note, I would not be able to contribute in this discussion with you today if I would not be contributing in the work of the committee in real, as a true partner of my committee members, as I felt myself and I feel from them, because then I could tell you only the theory, but I hope that you feel that my messages come from my lived experience of track record of work with committee members, with regulators, work at agency, European Medicine Agency. And this could not be possible if I will not feel as an equal partner and would be able to work within the system as an equal partner to all of them.
Absolutely. Thank you for making that point. And Tomek, thank you so much for joining me for this discussion.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for a good question. I hope that together we will make this change happen, and next time we will meet in an elevator going, discussing how make this voting right really impactful. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.